Hello, this is Jen, the Liberty Lion. Today is June 23rd, 2022, and today I want to go over the federal constitution as a treaty, which is a type of contract. And this type of contract is between the states, the independent sovereign nations, which are the independent states. And that federal in English means foed or foederati in Latin. And in the congressional records, in some of the congressional records, they do use the spelling foed when talking of the federal constitution. So here is a congressional record. This is from memory.loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress. I will post this link in the description for you to see. This is the records from the Federal Convention. This one is from Georgia. We go down and it says here, an ordinance for the appointment of the deputies. So the state is appointing deputies by ordinance. An ordinance is an order. So the deputies were under orders to do certain things, and those things were to write an amendment to the Articles of Confederation with a federation. The Articles with a federation. The Confederate document is a firm league of friendship or a treaty between states. That treaty contains within it federal things, and when those federal things were lacking, what they did was the states, the independent nations or independent states, got together and they gave orders to their deputies to go into convention and write an amendment to the Confederation, which I've shown you in the documents here on memory.libraryofcongress.gov, to revise the federal portion of the Articles of Confederation and create a federal constitution. And they were under orders, so they could do no other thing. They couldn't come back with something else. They couldn't come back with a constitution that was something else other than an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, because they were under military orders by the sovereign nations to do a thing. If they did anything else, it would be void, because they would be doing it outside of the office to which they were appointed. They were appointed through orders to write an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, and those notes are within the documents on memory.libraryofcongress.gov. So therefore, the Constitution is, in fact, an amendment to the Articles of Confederation. That amendment is a treaty between the states, the independent nations, and we're going to go over why those are independent nations, also called independent states. The fact that they are independent is what we rely on to understand that those were the sovereign powers. The states were the sovereign powers, and as sovereign powers, they're called nations. An ordinance for the appointment of deputies from this state for the purpose of revising the foed constitution. That's treaty. Federal, Latin, foederati. Okay. This has been something that I've been looking at for a few years now, and so I'm going to explain it to you. And I apologize, I've been sick lately, so I'm a little bit hoarse, but regardless, we can get through this. So 2, under foedus, or foedo, a league, treaty, compact, alliance. Okay, a compact, a covenant, agreement, stipulation, bargain, a law. Okay, so foetus is a treaty, a firm league of friendship, a compact alliance. It's a contract. By the mere fact that they use the word agreement here means that it's a contract between two parties or two persons. And we know that it is because in the first part of the Constitution, the preamble, we see that it's an agreement between the states for doing certain things for the United States of America. A contract, basic part of a contract is an agreement upon sufficient consideration to do or not do particular thing. It can be express or implied, which means it can be written or unwritten. And of course, our Constitution, or the Constitution, is a written contract. It's a written agreement. It's a treaty. That's the type of contract, is a treaty, which is also an amendment to the Articles of Confederation. So it's a treaty by contract, or a contract by way of treaty, as an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, which is a firm league of friendship between all the independent states. A deliberate engagement, two or more persons. Okay, a contract is an agreement to do or not do a certain thing. And in the Constitution, there's an agreement to do some things, and everything else is not to do, or the things in the Bill of Rights is not to do. Not to infringe on speech, arms, so on and so forth, religion. Federal. A constitutional law, a term commonly used to express a league or compact between two or more states. An American law belonging to the general government or union of the states founded on or organized under the Constitution or laws of the United States. Federal government, union or confederation of several independent or quasi-independent states. The Constitution is an agreement between independent states. The type of agreement is treaty. It's a contract. We know it's a contract because it has the word for. The United States, we the people of the United States, will do all these things for the United States of America. Treaty, a compact made between two or more independent nations with a view to the public welfare. That does not mean involving itself in health and welfare of the private citizens of the independent states. An agreement, league, or contract between two or more nations or sovereigns. Sovereign means independent. Free means sovereign. Free means independent. That's why the Articles of Confederation uses all three words. It says that the states are and shall remain free, sovereign, and independent. They are nations or nation states, whatever. Formally signed by commissioners, properly authorized. Well, they were delegates and they were under an ordinance. They were ordered. And solemnly ratified by the several sovereigns of the supreme power of each state. So the states ratified it. The deputies signed it. A treaty is not only the law, not only a law, but also a contract between two nations, and must, if possible, be so construed as to give full force and effect to all its parts. The United States and the United States of America, or all the states. All the states are the United States of America, and they got together and they formed the United States of America. Let me rephrase that because I said that wrong. The United States of America got together and formed the United States. The United States of America are the independent states that got together and created the United States for its defense, its general welfare, defense, justice. Treaty of peace, treaty, international law, an agreement between two or more independent states. An agreement, league, or contract between two nations or sovereigns, formally signed by commissioners, properly authorized and solemnly ratified by the several sovereigns or the supreme power of each state. Okay, a treaty of peace. There's a treaty of peace on the record also as part of our organic laws. Okay, and that's the federal government. So what we have here is a federal constitution, which is a FOED, or a treaty, which is a contract between the United States and the United States of America, which was an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, a firm league of friendship, which recognized that the states are and shall remain free, sovereign, and independent. The federal government was supposed to be limited to doing its work on federal lands, which we see in the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, and in the preamble, which states that the Constitution is an agreement between the United States and the United States of America. So the United States of America are the independent states, which are and shall remain the sovereign entity, the sovereign nations or sovereign states, and that they created the federal government, which was allowed to create dependent states. And those dependent states were supposed to be used for the seat of government and military purposes, military areas, posts inside the state. So, state of Texas, for example, is the federal state, the federal dependent state in which the federal government has control over. And all the rest of the area of Texas is the Republic of Texas and is supposed to be free, sovereign, and independent. And the citizens of the free, sovereign, and independent state have nothing to do with the federal government, and the federal government has nothing to do with them. And there is part of a definition that states so much. I believe that's under federal. Term has not been imposed by any specific constitutional authority. I believe I went over the definition in a previous video where it said that the federal government has no power or authority over the citizens of the independent state. So here it's under federal government. So I'm going to read this to you because it's really important to understand that the federal government has no power or authority over the citizens of the independent state. So when we look at the Texas Jurisprudence 3rd edition manual, the one found in the law libraries that all the lawyers and judges and attorneys are supposed to be well aware of, we see that in Texas, it says that under statehood, the Republic of Texas never ceased to exist. And that means that there are citizens of the Republic of Texas, which is the independent state, and there are citizens of the state of Texas, which are the federal state. The federal citizens are on federal lands. The state citizens are on state lands. Now, what they've done is they've confused us all by creating a state that sounds just like the independent state, which they're not supposed to do. And that is in one of their laws, that they're not supposed to create entities that can be confusing in their name by their name being too much alike another entity. So you can't say under lowercase state of Texas and uppercase state of Texas and expect people to understand that these are two different things. They're not supposed to do that. So it says here In strict usage, there is a distinction between a confederation and a federal government, okay? Because a confederation is independent states and a federal government is dependent states. The former, confederation, term denotes a league or permanent alliance between several states, each of which is fully sovereign and independent. That would be the Republic of Texas, and each of which retains its full dignity, organization, and sovereignty, though yielding to the central authority, which is the federal government, a controlling power for a few limited purposes, such as external and diplomatic relations. And if you really want to understand the Constitution, what you need to know is that most of what is in the Constitution applies to the federal people on the federal lands, and that the things that apply to the states are those few limited things for external and diplomatic relations, being representatives that speak for the sovereign nations or the sovereign states, which are the independent states such as Republic of Texas, not State of Texas, for foreign relations or things going on with the State Department. In this case, the component states are the units with respect to the confederation, and the central government acts upon them, not upon the individual citizens. In a federal government, on the other hand, the allied states form a union, not, indeed, to such an extent as to destroy their separate organization or deprive them of quasi-sovereignty with respect to the administration of their purely local concerns, but so that the central power is erected into a true state or nation, possessing sovereignty both external and internal, while the administration of national affairs is directed and its effects felt not by the separate states deliberating as units, but by the people of all in their collective capacity as citizens of the nation. The distinction is expressed by the German writers by the use of the words Staatenbund and Bundesstaat, the former denoting a league or confederation of states, and the latter a federal government or state formed by means of a league or confederation. Okay, so the federal government is not supposed to intrude upon the people of the independent states, those are the people off federal lands, and get into our business or impose federal laws upon us. The fact that they have does not make it right and does not automatically clothe them with an authority that they were never given. So all those laws and all those Supreme Court cases which they have tried to use against us are void because they don't have the power to force us in under its authority. We're always supposed to be within our own local government, which is our sovereign state, and in Texas would be Republic of Texas, which is acknowledged in the most recent jurisprudence manual for Texas. It is also acknowledged in the GSA manual, which is the federal department that keeps track of all of the federal lands and the power that the federal government and the state has over those federal lands, those dependent states. Because some of those states, some of the states of the Union gave up all power over the federal lands. Some retained some power over the federal lands, and some states retained all power over the federal lands, with the exception of those few things listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Okay, so the purpose of this video is to show you that the federal government under the Constitution is a treaty. The treaty is a contract. The contract is signified by the two parties and the word for in the preamble. The preamble is, we the people of the United States do these things for the United States of America. We also see in the congressional records that the deputies were ordered to do a thing, and they could do no other thing but that, and that thing was to write an amendment to the Articles of Confederation for the federal portion of the Articles of Confederation, and that the Articles of Confederation are still good law, and that what it says in there under Article 2 is that the states are and shall remain free, sovereign, and independent. And being free, sovereign, and independent, we maintain all of our state rights, and we maintain the right not to be brought in under federal law, and that the federal government only has power and authority on the federal lands, and to do some things for the independent states as far as foreign matters or matters with foreign nations, and that's really all that they have a right to do. Nothing and no interpretation can take away that fact, because it's all written in the laws. They can try, and as much as they try, it's still void because it's unconstitutional and it's outside the constitutional office. Okay, so just a little bit more information to help you understand the place where everything sits, and the fact that we do not sit on federal lands and we do not sit at the seat of government means that our lex situs is not federal. Our lex situs means law of the land. The law of the land is for the federal government when it's the law of the Constitution, because the Constitution applies only on federal lands, and that the laws of the independent states apply within the independent states off federal lands, and sometimes the laws of the independent states even apply on the federal lands. That the independent states created the federal government, and that the federal government then created dependent states. And so when they talk about the state of this or the state of that or this state or that state, when it's coming from the federal government, you have to understand that they only have control over the federal state. They don't have control over the free, sovereign, and independent states. And not having control over the free, sovereign, and independent states, they don't have control over you unless you're on those federal lands. The federal government does not have control over the free, sovereign, and independent states, but the free, sovereign, and independent states, as well as the people of those states, are supposed to have control over the federal government. We of the independent states are civilians. We are higher than the military. The federal government is a military. It's a military institution. It's the erection of military posts and military people on military lands, which are supposed to be controlled by the independent states. They are supposed to yield to the civilians. What they've been trying to do is make themselves higher than the civilians, and they've been doing that by a variety of ways, including instituting their instrumentalities, the banks, the CDC, the FDA, Homeland Security, and all of these other things, and putting civilians in charge, because then civilians can rule over civilians. And even the people in Congress, the civilians there, I don't believe that they're supposed to be civilians. I believe they're supposed to have military commissions. They're supposed to have so many years being a citizen, which is a member of the United States, which is the federal government, which is the military. So they're supposed to be members of the military, citizens of the United States. And being citizens of the United States, they're supposed to be military, and military people are supposed to be sitting at the seat of government. And when you put military people at the seat of government, they have no power over civilians. But the president has two offices. He has a civilian office and a military office. He has a civilian office as executive of the United States of America, and he has a military office as commander-in-chief of the United States Land and Naval Forces and the militia when called into service. So he has control over the military, and he has some control over civilians when they're on military posts. So the president is in a situation where he can commission the military officers because he's the highest as a civilian, and he can also require civilians to abide by certain executive orders when they're on military posts. But he has no control over citizens or civilians not on federal lands. And the reason for that is because he was given control only over the federal people. So the reason why he's only in control of the militia when they're called into actual service is because once they're called into service, they go to the federal lands and they're given orders. They're under orders to work with the military, and so they're in a military capacity. So they leave their civilian capacity and go into a military capacity, which allows the president to order them around here or there or whatever for military tactical purposes in defense of the nation. When the militia is not called into service, he has no right over them. He has no control over them because they're in a civil capacity. So there's a lot of reasons to understand why Congress should not be civilians. They should be military. Being military, it makes sense because they can't make laws for civilians not on federal lands. Some civilians do live and work, or used to live and work on federal lands. Now they just work on federal lands. They've been, I guess, taken away the right to live on federal lands, which doesn't really make any sense when in an event or an emergency, they're called to service as essential personnel or what have you, that they would need to be local and they would need to have the protection of being on the federal lands. They kicked off civilians a long time ago from the federal lands, from the military post, but they're really supposed to be and originally were given homes on the federal lands. It was important to have military posts constantly manned. You can't have a military post and not have it properly manned because that's not protecting the nation. And if you really want to know a lot more about this, you can read the officer's manual that I've posted in some of my other videos, which explains all of this that I'm telling you. And you can also read the GSA manual. You can read Eisenhower's report, and you can also read the Constitution after reading all these things to get a better understanding. And also read the Law of Nations by Emmerich de Vattel. Okay, so with that said, this is the end of the video. I hope that you understand what I'm telling you and that you understand that you are free, sovereign, and independent. And we are of the independent nation states. I'm not going to argue with people over what it's called. It doesn't matter. It's the fact that you're free, sovereign, and independent that really is the important aspect of all of this, and that the federal government has no control or authority over you. And you see this in these recent Supreme Court cases where they are basically trying to backstep and backpedal without coming right out and telling you why they're doing it. And the reason why they're doing it is because they never had the authority to do anything that they've done in the last 150 years, basically. They don't want to come out and tell you that because they think it's going to cause too many problems with the system. And so what they're going to try to do is go backwards slowly. And we saw what happened with Roe versus Wade when people started picketing and going up to Washington and crying about the federal government undoing its abortion laws. The fact is that the Supreme Court never had power or authority to control the free people of the independent states. They never did. And by the Constitution, they never will. And we just need to understand that. We just need to turn a little switch in our head and turn off the lies and stop accepting the lies and start accepting the truth. And that is that we are free, sovereign, and independent. And the only way they could get control of us is through our signature on their various contracts, using or trying to use the federal government as a method to scare people into making them believe that they had to do what the federal government said, do what they said, being the instrumentalities. The Internal Revenue Service, which is part of the federal government, has no power or authority over people off of federal lands working for private corporations, whether those private corporations are registered as doing business, their lex situs in Washington, D.C. with the federal government, calling itself a federal entity or part of the federal state or what have you. It doesn't matter. We are still free, sovereign, and independent people. If it had the authority, it would not need your signature. Okay? If it had any authority, it would be like any other empire or oligarchy or totalitarian government where it would just force you to do a thing. Another thing you can think about is when you become a federal person on federal lands, you have to perform certain acts. You have to sign papers, which is your contract. You have to change your status. You have to take an oath. You have to do all of these sorts of things to become a federal citizen. And then once you leave federal government, your contract is over and you go back to being a citizen of the state. So what we have to do is we have to understand that we don't have to sign any of their papers. The idea that they tell us we have to is a lie, okay? And they lie, and they always have lied to us for many, many years. Okay, so please try to take the time to understand this video and what I'm trying to convey to you. And all I'm really trying to convey to you is that you are free, sovereign, and independent, and to think any other thing is to keep yourself chained intentionally to the federal system and the federal taxes and the federal lies, deceit, so on and so forth. So please like, share, subscribe, share the information with your friends and your family, acquaintances. Please consider sharing this video on other social media platforms, and take care. We're going to go through some possible difficult times, but we will be there for each other, won't we? Yes, we will.